Valentina Esperanza's hands trembled so violently beneath her bouquet of desert wildflowers that petals scattered onto the worn wooden floor of the San Felipe de Neri church. And when she finally forced herself to lift her eyes from the ground to meet the groom her father had sold her to for 200 acres of grazing land, the gasp that escaped her lips echoed through the small chapel like a gunshot. He was young, perhaps 25 at most, no more than 5 years her senior. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of days spent under the harsh New Mexico sun, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of good whiskey that widened with the same shock she felt coursing through her own veins. This was not the grizzled rancher she had imagined, not the weathered widower looking for a housekeeper with a marriage certificate. This was a man who looked as trapped as she felt. Preston Nash's jaw tightened as he stared at the young woman before him, and Valentina watched a muscle jump near his temple. His hands, she noticed, were clenched at his sides, knuckles white with tension. The priest cleared his throat, and the moment shattered like glass. "Dearly beloved," Father Miguel began, his voice echoing off the adobe walls, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Preston Nash and Valentina Esperanza in holy matrimony." Valentina barely heard the words. Her mind was racing backward, to 3 weeks ago when her father had informed her over breakfast that she would be married by month's end. Antonio Esperanza had not asked. He had simply stated it as fact, the same way he might comment on the weather or the price of cattle. "The Nash family owns the land adjacent to ours," he had said, not meeting her eyes. "A marriage will unite the properties. You will want for nothing." Nothing except choice, Valentina had thought bitterly. Nothing except the freedom to decide her own future. But she had held her tongue, because arguing with Antonio Esperanza was like arguing with a mountain. And her mother had already passed, 2 years prior, taking with her the only voice that had ever softened her father's iron will. Now, standing at the altar in her mother's cream-colored wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, Valentina felt the weight of that choice pressing down on her shoulders. She studied Preston's face, searching for something, though she did not know what. Cruelty, kindness. Any hint of who this stranger truly was. "Preston Nash," Father Miguel continued, "do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Preston's throat worked as he swallowed. His eyes, still locked on Valentina's, held something she could not quite name. Resignation. Anger. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough, like wind over sand. "I do." The words felt like a door closing. Valentina's heart hammered against her ribs. "Valentina Esperanza, you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband." She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. In the front pew, her father shifted, a warning in the movement. Behind Preston, she could see an older man who must be his father, Harold Nash, watching with cold satisfaction. This marriage was not about her or Preston at all. It was about land, about water rights, about 2 stubborn men trying to build empires in a territory that resisted taming. "I do," she whispered, and the words tasted like ash. Father Miguel smiled, oblivious to the tension crackling through the church like summer lightning. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico and Almighty God, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride." Valentina's breath caught. She had not thought this far ahead. Preston stepped closer, and she could smell sage and leather and something else, something clean like mountain air. He hesitated, and she saw the same uncertainty in his face that she felt churning in her stomach. Then his hand came up, gentle despite its obvious strength, and cupped her cheek. The calluses on his palm were rough against her skin. "I am sorry," he murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. Then his lips brushed hers, feather light and brief, and he pulled away before she could even process what had happened. The small gathering of family and neighbors erupted in polite applause. Valentina felt dizzy, unmoored, as though she had stepped off solid ground into a river whose current she could not gauge. The reception was held at the Nash Ranch, a sprawling property 10 miles south of Santa Fe proper. The house was larger than Valentina's family home, built of adobe with a wide veranda that wrapped around 3 sides and offered views of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rising purple and gold in the distance. Inside, the main room had been cleared for dancing, and tables laden with food lined the walls. Someone had strung paper lanterns from the vigas, and they swayed in the breeze from the open windows, casting dancing shadows across the packed earth floor. Valentina stood near the door, accepting congratulations from people she barely knew, her new husband nowhere to be seen. She had watched him disappear toward the barn the moment they arrived, his shoulders rigid beneath his Sunday jacket. Her father and Harold Nash stood in the corner, already deep in conversation about fence lines and water access, the marriage apparently forgotten now that it had served its purpose. "You look like you are about to bolt." Valentina jumped at the voice. An older woman had appeared at her elbow, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with a face lined by sun and laughter. She held 2 cups of punch and offered one to Valentina. "I am Rosa," she said. "I have been keeping house for the Nash family since Preston was in short pants. And you, my dear, look like you could use a friend." Valentina took the cup gratefully, her throat dry. "Is it that obvious? Only to someone who is paying attention." Rosa's gaze swept the room, then returned to Valentina with unexpected gentleness. "Preston is a good man. Stubborn as they come, mind you, and he keeps too much locked up inside, but good. He will not hurt you. He does not want this marriage any more than I do," Valentina said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Rosa's expression shifted, something knowing crossing her weathered features. "No, I do not suppose he does, but that does not mean something real cannot grow from it if you both give it a chance." Before Valentina could respond, the musicians struck up a waltz and Harold Nash's voice boomed across the room. "Where is my son? Time for the first dance." Preston materialized from somewhere, his face carefully blank. He crossed to Valentina, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, 2 people bound by law and land but connected by nothing else. Then he offered his hand. "Shall we?" His palm was warm and steady against hers as he led her to the center of the room. The other guests fell back, creating a circle around them. Preston's other hand settled on her waist, respectful but impersonal, and they began to move. "You know how to waltz?" he asked after a moment, his voice low enough that only she could hear beneath the music. "My mother taught me," Valentina replied. "You?" "Same. She said a man should know how to dance with his wife." His jaw tightened, though I imagine she pictured different circumstances. Valentina studied his face. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw despite his obvious effort to shave cleanly for the wedding. "You did not want this either." It was not a question, but Preston answered anyway. "My father informed me 2 months ago that he had arranged a marriage. He said it was time I settled down, that uniting the properties would secure both families' futures." His eyes met hers, and the bitterness there was unmistakable. "I had no say in the matter, nor did I." The admission hung between them, sharp and painful. 3 weeks. That is all the notice I received. Something shifted in Preston's expression. The rigid anger softened, replaced by something that might have been understanding. His hand on her waist tightened fractionally, no longer quite so impersonal. "I thought," he began, then stopped, seeming to wrestle with the words. I assumed you had agreed to this, that you were content with the arrangement. Valentina let out a breath that was almost a laugh but held no humor. And I thought the same of you, that you had asked for this, or at least welcomed it. The music swelled around them, and they turned in silence for a long moment, both absorbing this revelation. Around them, other couples had begun to join the dance, but Valentina barely noticed. She was too focused on the man holding her, on the way his entire demeanor had changed in the space of a few sentences. "We are both trapped, then," Preston said finally. "Yes. That is something, I suppose. At least we are trapped together." Despite everything, Valentina felt her lips curve upward. Is that meant to be comforting? Probably not. But there was the faintest hint of warmth in his voice now, a thawing of the ice between them. "I will try to be a decent husband, Valentina. I will not make you more miserable than this situation already does. That is a low bar to clear, I am aware." He guided her through a turn, more graceful than she had expected, but it is the best I can offer right now. It was honest, at least. Valentina found she appreciated that more than empty promises. "Then I will try to be a decent wife, though I confess I am not entirely sure what that means under these circumstances. I suppose we will figure it out as we go." The music ended and Preston released her immediately, stepping back to a proper distance. But something had changed between them, some small bridge built across the chasm of their forced union. It was not much, but it was something. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of faces and conversations that Valentina would not remember later. She smiled until her cheeks ached, accepted congratulations from strangers, and tried not to think about what would happen when the last guest left, and she was alone with her new husband in a house that was not her home. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the guests finally began to depart. Antonio Esperanza embraced his daughter stiffly, his face unreadable. "You have done well," he said, and Valentina understood that he meant she had obeyed, had fulfilled her duty. There was no affection in the words, no acknowledgement of what he had taken from her. "Goodbye, Papa," she said, and watched him ride away without looking back. When the last wagon disappeared down the dusty road, Valentina found herself standing on the veranda, alone with her thoughts. The house behind her was quiet now, Rosa having retired to her small cottage behind the main building. Preston had vanished again, and Valentina was too tired to wonder where. She heard footsteps and turned to find him approaching, his jacket discarded and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He carried 2 glasses and a bottle of what looked like whiskey. "I thought you might need this," he said, offering her a glass. Valentina took it, grateful. The whiskey burned going down, but it was a good burn, warming her from the inside. They stood in silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Your room is ready," Preston said finally. "It is at the end of the hall upstairs. Mine is at the opposite end." He paused. "I will not expect you to share my bed unless you wish to. This marriage may have been forced on us, but I will not force anything else." Relief flooded through Valentina, so intense it left her weak-kneed. She had been trying not to think about this moment, about what rights a husband might claim. "Thank you." Preston nodded, staring out at the darkening landscape. "We have been given a strange situation, you and I. I think we should be honest with each other, at least. No more pretending than we must do in front of others." "Agreed." "Then I will be honest now. I am angry. Not at you, but at this entire arrangement. I had plans for my life, dreams that did not include inheriting my father's ranch or marrying a woman I had never met." He drained his glass in one swallow. "But I am trying not to take that anger out on you because you did not choose this either." Valentina appreciated his candor, even as it echoed her own feelings so precisely that it hurt. "I understand. I am angry too. I had hoped to see more of the world before I settled down. I wanted to teach school, maybe travel to San Francisco or even back east." She laughed bitterly. Foolish dreams for a rancher's daughter. Not foolish. Preston looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw genuine regret in his eyes. Just impossible now. Yes. The night settled around them, full of crickets and the distant cry of a coyote. Valentina thought about the years stretching ahead, bound to this man she did not know, living a life she had not chosen. It felt like drowning in slow motion. "We should get some rest," Preston said eventually. "Tomorrow we start learning how to live with this." Valentina followed him inside, up the stairs to the room that was now hers. It was simply furnished but clean, with a large bed covered in a quilt that someone had clearly made by hand, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the corrals. Her few belongings, brought over earlier in the day, sat in a trunk at the foot of the bed. "Good night, Valentina," Preston said from the doorway. "Good night, Preston." He closed the door softly behind him, and Valentina was alone. She sank onto the bed, still wearing her mother's wedding dress, and let the tears she had been holding back all day finally fall. The next morning, Valentina woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of roosters crowing. For a moment, she forgot where she was, expecting to see the familiar walls of her childhood bedroom. Then memory crashed back, and with it the weight of her new reality. She dressed quickly in one of her simple day dresses and braided her dark hair over one shoulder. The house was quiet as she made her way downstairs, but she could smell coffee and something baking. Following her nose, she found the kitchen, where Rosa was pulling a pan of biscuits from the oven. "Good morning, child. Coffee is on the stove." Preston left before dawn, rode out to check the fences on the North Range. He will be back by midday. Valentina poured herself a cup, grateful for something to do with her hands. Does he always leave so early? When something is troubling him, yes. That boy works himself to the bone rather than sit still with his thoughts. Rosa set the biscuits on the table along with butter and jam. "Sit, eat. No good ever came from an empty stomach." The biscuits were light and fluffy, and despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach, Valentina found she was hungry. Rosa moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, and Valentina watched her, feeling lost and useless. "What should I do?" she asked finally. "I mean, what are my responsibilities here?" "My father's house was smaller and I managed most of the cooking and cleaning, but here you are the lady of the house," Rosa said firmly. "Which means you do what you wish. If you want to help with the cooking, I will welcome the company. If you want to learn the ranch business, Preston can teach you. If you want to read books all day in the parlor, that is your choice too. You are not a servant here, Valentina. You are Preston's wife, whether either of you wanted that or not." The kindness in Rosa's voice made Valentina's throat tight. "I do not know how to do nothing. I need to be useful." "Then come. I will show you around properly, and you can decide where you fit." The Nash ranch was larger and more complex than Valentina had realized. Besides the main house, there was a bunkhouse for the hired hands, currently home to 5 men who worked the cattle and maintained the property. There were barns and corrals, a smokehouse, a root cellar, and a chicken coop. The land itself stretched for miles, rolling high desert punctuated by piñon and juniper, with the mountains rising to the east like sentinels. Rosa introduced her to the men as they worked, and they touched their hat brims respectfully, curiosity plain in their faces. Valentina felt like a curiosity herself, the bought bride, the stranger who had been grafted onto this place by legal agreement. By the time Preston rode in around noon, dusty and tired, Valentina had explored most of the immediate property and was helping Rosa prepare lunch. She heard his boots on the porch, the creak of the door, and then he appeared in the kitchen doorway, pulling off his hat. "Valentina," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "You are in the kitchen. Rosa was kind enough to show me around this morning. I thought I would help with lunch." She kept her voice neutral, unsure of what he expected from her. Preston hung his hat on a peg and crossed to the wash basin, rolling up his sleeves to scrub the dust from his hands and face. "You do not have to work in the kitchen if you do not want to." Rosa said as much. "But I prefer to be useful." He dried his hands on a towel, studying her with those whiskey-colored eyes. "Fair enough. Just so you know, you are welcome anywhere on this ranch. If you want to learn the business side of things, I will teach you. My mother used to keep the books before she died, and they have been something of a mess since. If you have a head for figures—" "I do, actually." Valentina had always been good with numbers, had helped her father with accounts before he decided she was more valuable as a bargaining chip. "I would like that." Something that might have been relief crossed Preston's face. "Good. That is good." They ate lunch at the kitchen table, the three of them, and the conversation was easier than Valentina had expected. Rosa had a gift for drawing people out, and she coaxed stories from both of them, finding small points of connection. Preston had broken his arm falling out of a cottonwood tree when he was 10. Valentina had once convinced her cousin to help her sneak out to a dance in town, only to be caught by her father on the way back. Small things, ordinary things, but they built a fragile framework of familiarity. After lunch, Preston showed Valentina the ranch office, a small room off the main parlor that was cluttered with ledgers and papers. "I am afraid it is a disaster," he admitted, looking genuinely embarrassed. "I can manage the physical work of the ranch, but the paperwork has always eluded me." Valentina surveyed the chaos with a practiced eye. "May I try to organize it, please? If you can make sense of this, I will be in your debt." He left her to it, and Valentina dove into the work with something approaching relief. Here, at least, was something she understood, something she could control. She spent the rest of the afternoon sorting papers, entering figures into ledgers, and creating a system that actually made sense. When Preston returned at sunset, she had made significant progress. He stopped in the doorway, staring at the transformed office. "How did you do this?" It just needed organization, and some of these invoices had not been paid yet. "I made a list of what needs to be sent where." Preston moved into the room, picking up the list, scanning it. "This is incredible. This would have taken me weeks, and I still would have made mistakes." "I told you I had a head for figures." Valentina allowed herself a small smile. "I can continue with this if you like. It might take another few days to get everything truly in order, but after that, it should be easy to maintain." "Yes, please. God, yes." He laughed, and it was the first genuine laughter she had heard from him. It transformed his face, easing the hard lines around his mouth. "You may have just saved my sanity. Then I suppose I am useful after all. More than useful." He met her eyes, and for a moment something warm passed between them, a spark of real connection. Then it was gone, and he cleared his throat. "I should wash up for dinner." Over the following days, they fell into a cautious rhythm. Preston rose before dawn to work the ranch, and Valentina spent her mornings organizing the office, and her afternoons learning the household from Rosa. They ate dinner together each evening, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. At night they retreated to their separate rooms, two strangers living parallel lives under one roof. It was not happiness, but it was not misery either. And slowly, carefully, Valentina began to notice things about her husband. The way he was patient with the horses, gentle with the animals even when he was frustrated with the work. The way he always thanked Rosa for meals, never taking her labor for granted. The way he listened when Valentina spoke, really listened, his full attention on her words. 2 weeks into their marriage, Harold Nash arrived for dinner, along with Antonio Esperanza. Valentina felt her stomach clench when she saw them ride up together, their faces set with purpose. "This cannot be good," Preston muttered, standing on the veranda beside her. They were right. Over a tense meal, the two older men laid out their problem. The boundary line between the two properties, which had seemed clear when they arranged the marriage, was now in dispute. A mining company claimed that a survey from 15 years prior gave them rights to a strip of land that included the best water access on both ranches. Without that water, both properties lose significant value, Harold said flatly. The marriage was supposed to settle this, to give us a united front against any claims. But if we cannot prove clear title, the whole thing falls apart. What are you saying? Preston's voice was tight, controlled. Antonio Esperanza looked at his daughter with cold calculation. We are saying that if this boundary dispute cannot be resolved in our favor, the marriage may need to be annulled. There is no point in uniting the properties if the best land is not actually ours. Valentina felt the blood drain from her face. Annulment. Freedom. The chance to reclaim her life, to escape this arrangement she had never wanted. But when she looked at Preston, saw the rigid set of his shoulders and the muscle jumping in his jaw, she did not feel relief. She felt something else entirely, something that made her chest tight and her hands cold. "I see," Preston said quietly. "And what do you expect us to do about this?" "There is a hearing in Santa Fe in 2 weeks," Harold replied. "Lawyers will argue the case. But in the meantime, I suggest you two think carefully about whether this marriage is worth maintaining if the land situation does not resolve in our favor." After they left, Preston disappeared to the barn without a word. Valentina stood in the kitchen, Rosa's hand on her shoulder, and tried to understand what she was feeling. "Go to him," Rosa said softly. "He probably wants to be alone. He always wants to be alone when he is hurting. That does not mean it is what he needs." Valentina found Preston in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, his head in his hands. She approached slowly, unsure of her welcome. "Preston," he looked up, and the expression on his face stopped her breath. It was not anger. It was loss, raw and painful, as though something precious had been torn away. "They want to annul it," he said, his voice rough. 2 weeks ago I was furious about being forced into this marriage, and now they want to erase it like it never happened, and he stopped, swallowed hard. "I do not want that." Valentina's heart hammered against her ribs. "You do not?" "No," he stood, crossing to her with quick strides. "These past 2 weeks, getting to know you, watching you bring order to the chaos of this place, talking with you over dinner. It has been God, Valentina. I know we barely know each other, but I do not want to lose what we are building. Even if it is small, even if it is just the beginning of something, I want the chance to see where it could go. Preston, I know you did not want this marriage. I know you were trapped the same as me. And if you want the annulment, if you want your freedom, I will not fight it. But if there is any part of you that wants to stay, that thinks maybe we could make something real out of this arrangement, then I need you to know that I want that too." Valentina stared at him, her mind racing. When had this happened? When had she stopped seeing him as her jailer and started noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his hands, the loneliness that matched her own? When had she begun to care what he thought, what he felt? "I do not want the annulment either," she whispered, and watched relief flood his features. "I was so angry at first, so resentful, but you have been kind to me, Preston. You have given me space and respect and the freedom to find my place here. And I think I would like to see where this could go too." Preston reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he took her hands in his. His palms were warm and calloused and steady. "Then we fight for this," he said. "Whatever it takes, we fight to keep this marriage, to keep the land, to prove that we belong together." "Yes," Valentina agreed, and felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like the first foundations of a choice freely made. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of activity. Preston and Valentina pored over old surveys and legal documents, tracing the history of both properties back decades. They found inconsistencies in the mining company's claims, evidence that the survey they cited had been disputed and overturned years before. Valentina's head for numbers proved invaluable as she cross-referenced dates and figures, building a case with the precision of a lawyer. They worked side by side in the office, often late into the night, and somewhere in those long hours, the distance between them continued to shrink. Preston would bring her coffee without being asked. Valentina would notice him rubbing his tired eyes and insist he rest. They began to anticipate each other's needs, to move in sync, to communicate in half-sentences and shared glances. One night, Valentina looked up from a ledger to find Preston watching her, his expression soft in the lamplight. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I was just thinking how lucky I am," he said quietly. "That out of all the women my father could have chosen, he chose you." Warmth spread through Valentina's chest, sweet and terrifying. "I feel the same." Preston stood and crossed to her, and when he cupped her face in his hands this time, there was no audience, no priest watching. Just the two of them in the quiet office, surrounded by papers and lamplight and the fragile thing growing between them. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not because we are supposed to, or because anyone is watching, but because I want to." Valentina's breath caught. "Yes." His lips were gentle on hers, questioning, and she answered by leaning into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat under her palm, fast and strong, matching her own racing pulse. The kiss deepened, and it was nothing like the brief, impersonal brush of lips at their wedding. This was real, a promise and a question all at once. When they finally pulled apart, Preston rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. "I am falling in love with you," he said, the words raw and honest. "I know it is too soon, I know we barely know each other, but I cannot help it. Every day I fall a little more." Valentina's eyes stung with sudden tears. "I am falling too. It terrifies me, but I am." Then we fall together. The day of the hearing arrived too quickly. Santa Fe's courthouse was a solid adobe building on the plaza, and it was crowded with lawyers and claimants and spectators drawn by the promise of drama. Valentina wore her best dress, and Preston was in a suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome. They sat together, their hands clasped under the table where no one could see, drawing strength from each other. The mining company's lawyer presented his case first, citing the old survey and claiming rights to the disputed strip. He was smooth and confident, and Valentina felt her stomach sink as she listened. Then their lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Tobias Garrett, stood to present their counter-argument. He walked the judge through the documents Valentina and Preston had uncovered, showing the inconsistencies, proving that the mining company's survey had been overturned. He produced testimony from old-timers who remembered the original boundary markers. He built a case so solid that even the mining company's lawyer began to look uncertain. When it was over, the judge retired to consider his verdict. Valentina and Preston waited outside in the hot sun, neither of them speaking. Harold Nash and Antonio Esperanza hovered nearby, their faces unreadable. After what felt like hours, they were called back inside. The judge, an elderly man with steel-gray hair, looked down at them from the bench. After reviewing all the evidence presented today, I find in favor of the Nash and Esperanza families. The mining company's claim is without merit, based on a survey that was properly overturned 15 years ago. The original boundary stands. Relief hit Valentina like a physical wave. Beside her, Preston let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. They had won. The land was secure, and with it, their marriage. Outside the courthouse, Harold and Antonio were already celebrating, talking about expanding operations and increasing herds. They barely glanced at Preston and Valentina as they walked past, still absorbed in their plans. "They do not even care that they almost destroyed our marriage," Valentina said quietly. "No," Preston agreed. "But I have realized something these past weeks. I do not care what they think anymore. This marriage started as their idea, their plan for their land and their legacy. But it is ours now. We chose it, we fought for it, and whatever we build from here, it will be because we want it." Valentina looked up at her husband, this man she had gasped at seeing at the altar, this stranger who had become so much more. "Take me home, Preston." "Home," he repeated and smiled. "Yes, let us go home." That night, for the first time, Valentina did not go to her own room. She stood outside Preston's door, her heart pounding, and knocked softly. When he opened it, surprise and hope warring on his face, she stepped inside. "I do not want separate rooms anymore," she said simply. "I want to be your wife in truth if you want me." Preston pulled her close, his arms strong and sure around her. "I have wanted that since the moment you walked into my office and fixed my disaster of a filing system." She laughed against his chest, giddy with relief and joy and the heady freedom of choosing him. "That is a very unromantic reason. Then how about this? I want you because you are brave and smart and kind, because you challenge me and make me laugh, because when I look at you, I see my future, and it is better than any dream I had before." "Much better," Valentina murmured and kissed him. They learned each other that night, slowly and tenderly, two people building something real from the ashes of a forced arrangement. And in the morning, when Valentina woke wrapped in Preston's arms, sunlight streaming through the window, she felt something she had not expected to feel in this life. She felt chosen. The months that followed were not without challenges. Learning to truly share a life, to navigate disagreements and merge two different upbringings, required patience and compromise from both of them. But they approached it the same way they had approached the boundary dispute, as partners working toward a common goal. Valentina took over management of the ranch's finances completely, and under her careful stewardship, they began to prosper. Preston taught her to ride better, to understand the rhythms of the cattle and the land. They made decisions together, built plans together, and slowly the ranch stopped being the Nash property or the Esperanza property. It became theirs, a reflection of their combined efforts and shared dreams. Rosa watched it all with quiet satisfaction, occasionally muttering things about stubborn young people who needed a push to see what was right in front of them. Valentina began to think of her as the mother she had lost, and Rosa seemed to bloom under the affection of this young woman who had brought new life to the house she tended. A year after their wedding, Valentina realized she was pregnant. She told Preston one evening as they sat on the veranda, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice tight with emotion. "As sure as I can be. Rosa suspects, too. She has been watching me like a hawk for weeks." Preston pulled her close, his hand settling over her still flat stomach with a reverence that made Valentina's eyes sting. "A baby, our baby." Are you happy?" He turned her to face him, and the joy in his eyes was unmistakable. "Valentina, I have never been happier in my life. You have given me everything. A real marriage, a true partnership, and now this. How could I be anything but happy?" Their son was born in the spring of 1882, in the bedroom they now shared, with Rosa attending and Preston pacing holes in the floor downstairs. When Rosa finally brought him up to meet his child, Preston took one look at the tiny, red-faced infant and promptly started crying. "He is perfect," he said, his voice choked. "Valentina, he is perfect." "We will name him Raphael," Valentina said, exhausted but radiant, "after your mother's father. Rosa told me about him." Preston kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Thank you for him, for everything, for choosing to stay when you could have left." "I chose you," Valentina corrected, "and I would choose you again every day." Raphael Nash was baptized in the same church where his parents had married, and this time there was no tension, no resentment, only joy. The christening party was held at the ranch, now officially called the Nash Esperanza Ranch, a compromise that had taken some negotiating but felt right. 3 years after their wedding, the boundary dispute was finally, completely settled through a peaceful arbitration that divided some contested land between all parties. To celebrate, Valentina and Preston decided to throw a fiesta, inviting everyone from miles around. The day of the celebration, the ranch was transformed. Long tables groaned under the weight of food. Musicians played guitars and fiddles. Children ran through the gathering, Raphael toddling along with them, his serious face so much like his father's that it made Valentina smile every time she looked at him. She stood on the veranda, watching it all, feeling the warm weight of contentment settle over her. So much had changed since that day she stood at the altar and gasped at the sight of the handsome cowboy who was to be her husband. She had been so angry then, so certain that her life was ending. Instead, it had been beginning. Arms wrapped around her from behind and Preston's chin settled on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about? About the day we married? How terrified I was. How sure I was that you had chosen this, that you wanted to trap me." "I was thinking the same thing. I was so angry at you that day." Valentina turned in his arms, looping her hands behind his neck. "And now I am grateful every single day that our stubborn, interfering fathers forced us together, because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." He kissed her softly. "You are my partner, my love, my choice. Always my choice. And you are mine." Raphael toddled over, demanding to be picked up, and Preston swung him high, making him shriek with laughter. Valentina watched them, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The fiesta continued around them, celebration and music and laughter filling the air. Antonio Esperanza and Harold Nash sat together, still arguing about cattle, but there was less edge to it now. Rosa presided over the food tables like a general commanding troops. The Hands and their families mingled with townspeople and neighbors, all of them part of the community this ranch had become. As the sun set and the lanterns were lit, Preston pulled Valentina into a dance. It was another waltz, like the one at their wedding, but everything was different now. There was no stiffness, no careful distance. They moved together naturally, two people who had learned each other's rhythms and found harmony in them. "I love you," Preston said, soft enough that only she could hear beneath the music. "I love you too," Valentina replied. "More than I ever thought possible." They danced under the stars, surrounded by the life they had built together from the ruins of an arrangement neither had wanted. And Valentina thought about the girl she had been, standing at an altar gasping at a handsome stranger, certain her life was over. She had been wrong. Her life had only just begun. Years later, Valentina would tell the story to Raphael as he grew, and eventually to his younger sister Elena, born 2 years after him. She would tell them about the arranged marriage, about the anger and resentment, about the boundary dispute that almost tore it all apart. And she would tell them about the choice she and their father had made to fight for something real, to build love from the foundation of obligation. "So you see," she would say, bouncing a grandchild on her knee decades later, "sometimes the worst beginnings lead to the best endings. Your grandfather and I were forced together, but we chose to stay. We chose to love, and that choice made all the difference." Preston, gray-haired and still handsome, would catch her eye across the room and smile, and Valentina would feel the same flutter in her chest that she had felt that first time he kissed her in the ranch office, surrounded by ledgers and lamplight. Some marriages began with love and ended in resentment. Theirs had begun with resentment and ended in a love so deep and true that it colored every corner of their lives. It was not what either of them had planned, not what they had dreamed of in their youth. But standing on the veranda of their ranch, watching the sun set over the land they had fought to keep and built together, Valentina could not imagine any other life. She had gasped when she saw the handsome cowboy at the altar, shocked and afraid. Now, after decades of marriage, partnership, and love, she looked at that same man and felt only gratitude. Gratitude for stubborn fathers and boundary disputes, and all the obstacles that had forced them to fight, to choose, to commit. Gratitude for a beginning she had hated that led to an ending she would not trade for anything in the world. This was their story. An arranged marriage that became a love match. A forced union that became a willing partnership. A transaction that became a romance. And it was, in the end, exactly the life they were meant to live.